recently, I've started noticing something peculiar. I've started seeing the emergence of something I've seen before, but also different. I've started seeing the emergence of Pokemon-like games. Games that, like Pokemon, involve capturing, training, and breeding monsters. And what I find to be the most peculiar is the quality of what is being produced. They don't look like cheap knockoffs. They look and feel like something new, something different, but still true to what I know, what I've been accustomed to for years. And then the magic happened. My eyes caught a glimpse of this. I was no longer curious, I was now intrigued. I had to play this game. Alright, now that I got you guys all riled up, let's talk about Monster Crown. The game begins very awkward. I do have a lot of good things to say about this game, but the beginning of this game is not one of them. The game begins with creating your character with no music. The actual creation of your character is great, with a variety of sprites and color palettes to choose from, but doing this with no music is weird. Then next we just jump right into a flashback where your dad gives you a lecture, and then we see a more detailed version of what he's supposed to look like. I don't like it. Take me back to the sprites, please. Everything looks way better that way. Our dad also gives us some foreshadowing of a big baddie, and then finally he's done talking. The game then begins how it should have began, and now you're in your room with Happy Town music blaring, ready to go on your adventure. Now please, no more interruptions. The game now begins swimmingly. You're on a farm, you learn about monsters and how to catch them, you fill out a questionnaire in a comic book and get delivered your own buddy, and then your dad treats you like a fucking boss and tells you to go deliver this program to one of his old pals that just happens to be a fucking king. That is awesome. Why did you start the game off awkward when this right here is badass? Oh yeah, also how you catch monsters in this game is awesome too. So in Pokemon, you of course throw Pokeballs in order to capture wild monsters. Everyone knows this. But in this game, you don't do that. In Monster Crown, you throw contracts. You throw a contract!
Hey, Skune. Hey, I want you to start finding other people's pets for me and also wild animals. So, here's a contract. Let me know when you're done looking at it, okay? Alright. Good boy.
As stupid as it sounds, I like it. I like everything about it. I actually wish that there was more information about this in this game, and there's already a whole town devoted to the study and creation of this stuff. Yeah, on your journey you will have to go to a town where people study and create contracts. It's awesome. I am aware that in Pokemon X and Y there is a Pokeball factory, but it's not as cool as what we got here. Anyway, while you're on your MacGuffin journey that your dad set up for you, you will encounter a ton of different monsters. Some are easy to beat, and some are way above your pay grade. When it comes to the distribution of these monsters based on their difficulty, this game has monsters placed around, even at the beginning of the game, that you have no chance of beating. This is a lot different than other traditional RPGs, and it's really a double-edged sword. It's interesting in that logically it makes sense. Not every monster is going to be at a similar level of strength based on their location. And really, a legendary monster should truly be legendary, with them being far superior in strength than those around them. But this is also a problem in that it hinders exploration. Like, yeah, of course I want to see everything in the game, but if out of nowhere there's these monsters that are far better than me, or there's a super strong boss that I can't even tell how strong they are when they're just sitting right in front of me, then I'm not really going to want to explore. I want to stick to the main routes, farm until I'm freaking strong, and then slowly start dipping my toes into what's around. And this is a shame because there's a lot to explore here. So much in fact that I didn't realize how much there was to explore until my second playthrough of the game, and I already thought that I was already pretty thorough already. So when it comes to content, this game is bang for your buck. Speaking of content, let's take a look at what you guys have been all waiting for. The monsters. There are a lot of different monsters in the game. There's a dog monster, there's a dragon monster, there's even a Pikachu-like monster. His name is Hermes. I like him. What's interesting about Monster Crown that can also be intimidating is that you can breed monsters with each other to make new species. When I first heard this, I started getting flashbacks to Final Fantasy VII, and I already did my time into learning how to make a golden chocobo, okay? Just thinking about that, having to do the same thing over and over again, but for every monster in this game, it just made me preemptively angry. But that's not what happens here. Yes, hybrid monsters do exist, but these quote-unquote hybrids aren't really hybrids when you get down to it. They are just an alternate type of its primary parent monster. There are 5 different types of monsters in the game. There is Will, Brute, Malicious, Unstable, and Relentless. Once you get your journal, you get this handy diagram to recall this information. Now, I couldn't really remember this information so well in the game. I mean, it's not like water, fire, or grass from another game I'm thinking of. So I just figured out my own way to remember this information. Shield types beat fighting types beat ghost types beats poison types beats normal types, and normal types beat shield types. Obviously, my descriptions do not match up with what they actually are, but that's how I remembered it, and it works for me. Back to the different types though, when you do basic breeding, the child produced will take after the family of its primary parent, and will take after the type of its secondary parent. So if you have a Knight as the primary, the child will be a Knight that is of a different monster type. Based on what type the secondary parent is will decide what the monster will look like. In addition to this, in basic breeding the child will take after the color palette of their secondary parent. So if you like the design of the child produced but you don't like the color palette, you can create another one of them with a different color palette if you find the right monster. Later on though, you can get even more complicated with breeding, and manually select almost every little detail from the primary and secondary parent to get exactly what you want. But I honestly didn't really care that much for that. I like the simple breeding a whole lot more, and after doing multiple breedings and making the children of those breedings breed together, I somehow ended with a blue Knight. I'm guessing that if you breed several generations repeatedly together, you can end up back to the original design, but with a different color palette. That's interesting. Now to make a comparison to Pokemon, if that isn't a sin against Jupiter, my god, there are no gym leaders in Monster Crown. There are chiefs which basically act like gym leaders, but they aren't used the same way as gym leaders. In Monster Crown, you have to beat all of the chiefs in order to get permission to level up your monsters. Yeah, for some reason your monsters have a level cap that they can reach based on how many chiefs you have defeated. I would say that is pretty weird, but in Pokemon, you aren't allowed to cut down a tree unless a gym leader says it's okay, so to each their own, I guess. Speaking of the story, what is the story of Monster Crown? As awkwardly introduced at the beginning of the game, there is a story here, and actually, I kinda like it. Basically, there used to be these evil kings that were just plain nasty, and everybody hated them. A revolution was started, and those that championed the revolution won. Of the revolutionaries, all but 2 became kings. One of the revolutionaries died, and the other revolutionary, who happens to be your father, turned down the crown. Yeah, your dad is an important dude. He could have become a king if he wanted to, but he decided to pull a Cincinnatus and go back to the farm instead. Despite this though, ancient powers are at work. There is this big baddie named Beth, and she wants to be the ruler of the world. She is not interested in how the world has been reformed by your father and their buddies. She is only interested in reforming the world into her own image. Also, she may look like a young woman, but she isn't. She's been around for a long time. Through your adventures, you will also encounter this new modern revolutionary named David, who also has a creepy looking non-sprite design, and also this gangster. This gangster dude acts a lot like the romanticized versions of the mobsters from the early 1900s, and you could say that he's a lot like a young Don Corleone. He enlists you to encounter 3 legendary monsters, and at one point, you will have to choose between his side or David's. Alright, so maybe I shouldn't be telling you this, because this is very important. It's a big spoiler for the ending of the game, so if you're sensitive to spoilers, click off, go buy the game, I highly recommend it, and come right back, okay? So, guess what? That gangster guy actually has a secret identity. He's actually very important, just like your dad. It turns out that the gangster guy is actually Aber, brother of King Mao, the revolutionary that was said to have died. He works in the shadows as a gangster that wants to keep the world safe. David doesn't like him clearly, but when you put into perspective the blurred lines between good and evil, with revolutionary and criminal, I actually find it fitting that one of the revolutionaries that didn't become a king with a crown actually became a king in another fashion, as a mobster boss. So, the story is very interesting indeed. There are other parts of the story that I haven't mentioned yet. There is the tidbit about the dream egg that you can hatch into the dragon from the cover art, the saving of your dad who ventured off a little too far from the farm, the adventure into the power plant with the boy band, the history of how the first pack was made, and the encounters and endings of the game with Beth. As much as I ended up hating this girl, I was still taken aback at her dark ending. Yeah, so one thing about Monster Crown that is very different than the Pokemon games is that it is a lot darker. Yeah, Team Rocket was evil and all, but they didn't seem to shoot anybody, nor did we see anybody die because of it. In Monster Crown, that's a different story. For example, one of the first towns that you enter has this guy named Jasper. He goes off about how he's gonna own everything, including the city's mine. I think I like Jasper. Jasper's fellow townsmen don't though, and they try to hide the fact that they have discovered worthwhile minerals from the mine. Jasper does find out though, and when the whole town turns on him, he attacks you. You easily defeat him, and while he attempts to run away, or in this case, row away, he is drowned by a sea monster and killed. His son then comes out in shock that his dad has just died, and then once that's over, the happy music comes back on, and this girl congratulates you for defeating Jasper, who just happens to be the town's chief. So now the level cap is gone too. Wow, and all it took was the death of a son's father. Incredible! This is probably a good time, better than any, to bring up some of the negatives, some of the faults about this game. Although the game is full of content, there are a ton of glitches. Sometimes your map doesn't show up. Sometimes your little buddy becomes invisible. And sometimes cutscenes act a little funky. There was also this monster that I was told would keep following me if I kept going off the beaten path. And when I did this, yeah, he showed up. But once I went past this area and did some of the story bits and then came back, he was gone. I wanted to fight this guy, but now I can't. Lastly, the ending of the game is a little anticlimactic. You defeat Beth, but she still isn't stopped. She's about to be given the power of the dead evil kings when Gangster Guy shows up, shoots her with a double-barrel shotgun. You and David then go on a caravan back home, and then that's it. That's the game. There really isn't a good measurement of accomplishment that, for example, the Pokemon games have. I still really like the story, the monsters, the breeding mechanics, and the exploration, but I think that there are some things that can be improved on. I would love to see more Monster Crown games. I think that they have a lot of good stuff here, and based on the precedent of another Pokemon-like game called Nexomon, it has a sequel called Nexomon Extinction. So that just shows that these Pokemon-like games, they don't have to be one and dones. They can have sequels. They can have more games. There could be more Monster Crown games. And honestly, there should be. I like it. So is Monster Crown a game that you should pick up? In my opinion, absolutely. It's beautiful, it's packed full of content, it has some areas that it needs to clean up, but overall, this is something special. And again, this game can be bought at a low price. When I bought it originally, I paid $30 for it, but when I went back to it again to buy a friend of mine a copy, it was then half the price. So I decided to pick up 2 more copies, one for my friend, and another one for myself to keep sealed. On a good day, you can get this game for around $20 for a physical copy on the Switch, or you can pay around $20 for a digital copy on Steam. Whichever way you choose to purchase the game, I don't think that you're going to regret it. Alright guys, so that's all the time that I have for today, but before we go, let's go check up on my little buddy and see if he's done reviewing the contract.
Skune, you done reviewing the contract? Oh, well I don't see your signature anywhere, but look, if you don't want to be my personal monster that fights other people's pets for me, you can just tell me, okay? I don't think he's gonna sign the contract.